back to another episode of The Creator Consult, a podcast produced by Scruffy Chandelier Productions, dedicated to the specific crafts and lives behind all creators. From what are your creative pursuits, what drives you, to how do you improve your craft. This episode is another installment in our mini-series exploring some behind-the-scenes context in the making of the YouTube short series SCP D-Classified. I'm your host, Ryan Murphy, the writer, director, co-producer, videographer, and editor for the web series, and joining me today is my co-host, the series co-producer Faaiz Saad, who you will also recognize in his starring role as Omar Minhaj in SCP Declassified. Thanks for joining me again today, Faaiz.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. Great to be here.
This has been a fun series to do so far. We definitely had a lot of time in the first episode reminiscing about past events several years after they took place, and so I'm looking forward to doing that again today, talking about Episode 2, A Helping Hand.
This was a fun one.
This was definitely a fun one to film. It was a short episode, and the production was also pretty short. Production took place from July 8th through July 9th, 2019, and the original article that was the source material for this episode was SCP-864, Efficient Wash Basin, written by Carry-On Trooper on the SCP Wiki. So yeah, this episode was very short. It was kind of a time filler in the series, but I think for me, this was one of the most fun episodes to put together.
Yeah, like, only having to worry about one person's audio, it's a blessing, man.
No, and to that point, it was really good because there was literally one day where it was just you on set, and then the next day it was you and Carly as the hand on set, but again, we only had to worry about your audio at the time, so that was definitely a nice perk. And it's funny, too, because even though this episode was really fun to film, we've gotten some questions and some comments before about how, this episode doesn't necessarily fit with a lot of the rest of the series in the sense that there's no lore drops. We don't really learn anything important about Omar. I mean, the only thing that really happens is that first scene with Daniel's character, Andres, where we establish the relationship between Andres and Omar. But otherwise, from an outsider's perspective, that doesn't really have any context to the larger story. And one of the things that I just wanted to comment on in this podcast is where my headspace was in with this, other than just I thought this would be a fun effect. Narratively, I really wanted to take a beat after episode 1 for all of our viewers that aren't familiar with the SCP universe, kind of give them a concept that's very off the wall, but is also easy to perceive, and really set the tone along with the Rot Skull for these are the kind of crazy things that Omar is going to be meeting and testing with. And I think for that purpose, it really builds the world and builds kind of these mysterious artifacts and entities that Omar can interact with.
Right. And I think, too, like, whenever I have to explain this series to non-SCP people, the episode I always jump to or the example I always go to is a red bucket. It's like you have this world with all these, anomalous things and then give the red bucket example. And for whatever reason, this is the thing that makes it click in their heads. They, oh, that's what this is. I guess a skull with smoke that turns you into mashed potatoes is a little hard for people to understand.
Yeah, especially with all the complexities about the ruins and what language is it and the training to be able to do that. This is definitely an easier gateway one that you can basically just explain. Yeah, it's this bucket that when you fill it with water, weird things come out of it, and it's usually appendages.
Right.
It's still off the wall, but it's a little bit easier to grasp.
Right. No, I feel that. Another weird thing that happened with the arm, totally unintentional, is that it was a surprisingly big piece of our marketing for this movie.
Well, that's true. It was funny. We used it for a lot of social media campaigns, and then also it was the centerpiece for our movie poster, too, of you with the arm.
I remember I gave you a few different pictures for that poster, and that was the one you wanted.
Yeah, I think for me, that effect just really cracks me up. It's very simple. If you really think about it from a meta perspective, you know how we filmed it. It's a very easy trick. But something about just the way it turned out on film, it really amuses me, and I think subconsciously I was trying to use it every chance I could just because I thought it was a good gateway image for the series.
We love practical effects here.
100%. I guess the other main significance to this episode was this was also the premiere of our theme song. Since we started the first episode out just kind of going into Omar's room, this was the first one where we really showed the theme song for this series. And so I just wanted to take a quick beat to kind of talk about the development of the theme song and how we piece things together there.
If I recall correctly, so I was left in the dark about this. I just sort of showed up to your apartment one day, hey, Faaiz, let's go through some film. I want to show you a couple of things. And you're like, oh, by the way, listen to this. You just click in, like, this whole theme song comes. I'm like, Ryan, this is low-key catchy. Who did this? Like, I did this. I was like, really?
I remember we talked about earlier on, we were toying with the idea of using some of our budget to hire somebody to produce a song and set it together. And I had a hard time finding somebody. And so I have some background in music, but I've never digitally produced any music before. But I figured I'd kind of try to learn GarageBand and try to put something together. I mean, the background beat for the song is very basic. It's very simple. And I kind of added some water phone sound effects to kind of give it that creepy vibe at the end and layered a couple of tracks over it. It's not complex. I don't think it's an amazing work of art, but I think it served its purpose, and I thought it was catchy and a nice little way to
I liked it.
Intro it.
It was good. Especially for your first digital production. Like, it didn't sound like it was your first.
Thank you. I appreciate that for sure. And it was nice with the visuals too. I wanted to give it something that was like a simple kind of old-timey computer feel, since we know the Foundation, at least in my mind, uses a lot of old computers and has a lot of old servers to access their files. And we thought it would be kind of a fun thing if the intro sequence led up to each episode being a video file stored on a Foundation computer.
Right. No, I do like that.
So I think that fit together well, and it's, it's not perfect like a lot of other things with the series, but it's something that I think we can be proud of that we made, and it serves the purpose it was meant to.
Absolutely. I think you're downplaying it a little bit. I think, when you add music to something, you shoot something, it's just pure dialogue. It seems like there's something off. When you add music, it just elevates it that much more. And with the series too, when you played that song and you said, oh, this is made for us, that just made me realize, oh, this is getting bigger and bigger. Like, we made a song for this, This is big. We did a lot. We had to learn a lot. We had to do a lot of things that were outside of our area of expertise. And I think we delivered pretty well, especially on this song. Just another example of that.
Especially since we didn't contract any other music specifically for this production. All the other music was royalty-free or copyright-free music that we were able to use for the production. I think having something that was our own as the theme for the series was something that was important for both of us. And so I'm glad that we do have something unique to give our series a unique identity as its theme as well. Well, I think going from there, I think we should jump right into the behind-the-scenes facts for this episode.
Sounds good. So the desktop wallpaper art for the intro was created by DeviantArt user XXSoulHunterXX, and the icon was made by Calwin87. Thank y'all for making this and letting us use it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we really appreciate it. And, this wasn't a super unique fact. You can read this in the credits, but we wanted to give these creators a shout out for their help with the intro sequence. We really appreciate your fantastic art. So moving on to our second fact, this script for episode 2 is the only episode not written by me. The original script for episode 2 is actually written by Nicholas Bolin, co-founder of the Morbid Memories YouTube channel.
Yeah, I remember this was the only one you didn't write because I had to edit all of your scripts that you wrote, but this was the only one that I didn't edit. This was only you edited and Nicholas wrote.
With this being such a unique episode, I think it does take a little bit of its own vibe and its own energy with the source script being written by Nicholas, and I think that's not a bad thing. I think that's something that's a fun thing, and it keeps the pacing different. This fact actually leads right into your next fact, too.
Because we had someone else writing, this script has been through multiple edits, and the original ending to the script actually called for a taser to be used to stop the arm. Of course, this would be terrible for Omar because water and electricity aren't exactly the best things to mix. And so it was ultimately decided that this would be too difficult to film as well. What we ended up doing was Ryan was out thrift shopping and he found the Billy nightstick. The rest was history.
Nicholas's original vision for how this would have played out, I loved the thought of using the taser because, like you said, having Omar covered in water from being splashed from the bucket, that would have been something that would have been more disastrous for him, and it would have set a tone for how brutal the guards can be. Nicholas's vision for basically how the ending of the episode would have played out, I actually like better than what we were able to shoot, but I think, like you said, it was just limitations with the thought of trying to shoot something with a taser, and obviously we wouldn't have wanted to electrocute you on set.
Right.
Trying to be able to fake that with a fake taser, there were just too many components that made it more complicated than it needed to be. So yeah, we ended up just going with the good old Billy Club beating on that one.
Oh my goodness, my scapula. You'll find out about that in a minute.
For fact number 4, during the shoot, with the way the bucket was painted, we had multiple small chips of red paint that were basically flaking off throughout the shoot and littering the top of the black tablecloth that we used. So as a result, a majority of these little red chips were painstakingly painted out by yours truly in post-production to make the shots a lot clearer and just more cohesive. So that was a little labor of love that you may not have noticed if it was done well.
I feel so bad for you. I feel like I got off easy by just doing everything on camera. You just editing everything after. I felt like you got the short end of the stick there, especially with like all these little nitpicky things you had to do to edit. I guess like one thing we'd mentioned, one of the cameras we used had a dirty sensor or a faulty sensor or something on it, right?
Yeah, so there was a sensor mapping issue with one of the DSLRs that we were using to shoot the film. Basically, we shot the whole film on 2 Canon T2i Rebel series cameras, and one of them early on in production had a sensor mapping issue where it was a total of 7 basically dead pixels on the screen, and unfortunately we were deep enough into production that we couldn't stop. We didn't have time to get another camera, so we had to just keep filming from there. But it was something that I had to go through and individually map out each of those pixels for every individual shot of the film that was on that camera.
Oh my.
So there was a lot of very fine little editing, and usually I love the edit. That was something that was very tedious to be able to do, though.
But you did it. I guess like for every minute of film that we have, like that people can watch, how much time did it take to edit that? At least an hour per minute?
Yeah, so, it would depend on the shot. If it was something that there wasn't anything moving behind the dead pixel, it was really easy because I could just edit and have that same edit continuous from frame to frame. If it was on something that was moving and something that had a lot of color change, for example, if there was a dead pixel that was over your face, so as you moved, it would like cross over to your eye, into your eyebrow, into your nose. Those I had to edit frame by frame. And so I would say for each episode, easily added at least 20 to 30 hours of editing for each episode, probably a lot more for some of the longer ones.
Wow.
So if you were wondering why it took so long between production and when the series actually premiered, that was a big reason why.
That'll do it. And for our final fact for today's episode, the actor playing the hand, Carly Casey, is trained in American Sign Language and was consulted during the scripting process to write the dialogue so that she could respond appropriately by hand. While what is shown on screen is not always true American Sign Language due to the limitation of using one hand, this slang version of American Sign Language is true to the captions.
We really appreciate Carly's help with this, and like Faaiz said, even though it's not always true American Sign Language, we wanted to be as true to it as we possibly could with the limitations. We believe representation in that area is very important, and we really appreciate all that Carly did to make this part of the episode as accurate as possible. So thank you so much, Carly.
Like you said, there isn't a specific canon, but we try to maintain as close to canon. Whenever there are facts or something, we try to bring it as close to the facts as possible, whether it be the actual signing or even like when we're talking about diseases and viruses and the underlying pathologies, we try to keep it as close to the science as possible.
All right, and so moving forward to getting towards wrapping up this episode, we do have a couple of questions and comments from our viewers that we will be answering today. Our first one comes from YouTube username Julian Bogdan, and Julian asks, how did you make this? I assume this question is asking more about how was this episode made with the effect of the hand in the bucket.
So we needed 2 buckets, one with a hole in it and one with a regular bottom. And so Ryan gave me these 2 buckets. I spray painted them red. Ryan cut a hole in the table and the cloth so that when we needed Carly to put her hand through, she was able to do so pretty easily. In the scenes right before that, when we were filling the bucket, we used the regular bucket with a closed bottom so I could fill the water.
That's pretty much it. It's a pretty simple effect. And, with kind of compiling the props, the table, I knew I needed to get a table that was wooden so I could cut the hole in it. And it needed to be a table that, it was okay to destroy. So I actually picked up a little end table again on Craigslist for free. So I was able to get that and then picked up the tablecloth from a thrift store that I could cut a hole into it. The buckets themselves, we had the challenge that we needed to find 2 buckets that would be identical and that we could paint to look the same. So what I ended up doing is I went down to Lowe's and I was looking at some of the options for buckets they had. And as I was browsing the aisles, what I was looking for was a bucket that essentially was designed in such a way so the bottom of the bucket would be a separate piece that I could figure out how to separate. And so I found these buckets that had like a fused disc of metal to the bottom of the bucket, essentially making the bottom of the bucket. And I found this one and I looked at it and I thought, I think if I take this out to the parking lot and I hold it up and I just stomp down on it really hard, I'll be able to bottom out the bucket. So I purchased the 2, I went out to the parking lot and I took one of the buckets and I just kept stamping down until I knocked out the bottom of the bucket. And I was able to do that and not damage the outside. I may have almost cut open my leg in the process of doing that, but I didn't. And so it worked out okay, and I delivered the buckets to Faaiz, and he took care of the rest.
I can imagine just being in that parking lot, sitting in my car, and I look and I see some guy just angrily stomping in a bucket. Must have been a sight.
I did a lot of weird things for this movie that if there were any observers, I'm sure that they were really wondering what I was doing.
Right.
As a callback for the last episode, touting around that skull on the pedestal from place to place, people must have thought I was into some interesting things.
Right.
So I hope that answered your question, Julian. Our second question is from YouTube username Tiki, and the question asks, this real?
Well, Tiki, sorry to disappoint, but the answer is no. This is not real. This is all pretend. I guess with talented people like Ryan, really creative visual effects make the series seem as cool and as anomalous as it does.
And this is a good learning point to kind of talk about this. And Tiki, I don't know what your age is or what context this question was asked in, but it is something that's important to address with the SCP community at large. There are a lot of young children that sort of stumble across SCP Foundation videos, and they see this and they start to believe that it's something that is real. And it is something within the SCP group that there is a lot of role-playing as scientists and as SCPs and whatnot, that we kind of build this community of essentially role-playing that it is real. But it is really important for any children that stumble across this content to know that the SCP Foundation is not real. SCPs are not real. This is all creative, fictional work through a big online collaborative writing project called the SCP Wiki.
And just a side note, this content isn't meant for children. It's meant for older people. It has a lot of dark adult themes and can be a little distressing to younger kids. So just want to put that out there.
For sure. Viewer discretion is advised, and the Morbid Memories channel as a whole is age-gated as not intended for children. If you are a child and you're watching this content and you have parental approval to do so, we're not gatekeeping that. That is up to your parent or guardian. But just as a general principle for the channel, the content is not intended for children, as it does involve some language and some intense themes that might be jarring to younger viewers. But thank you so much for your question, Tiki. That was a good point that we did want to make sure that we talked about. That's going to wrap up the questions for this episode. And we wanted to encourage you, if you are following along with the series, along with this podcast, and you're watching the episodes on YouTube, if there are other questions that you have that you would like to ask us, we can't promise that they will be included in future podcasts, but we would love it if you left us a comment on the YouTube video, and we will try to respond to you in a timely manner. And so with that, we're getting close to wrapping up the episode, and so as we like to do with this series, we'd like to end on each of our main learning points from the process of making this episode that can hopefully have some advice to help some of you aspiring filmmakers out there looking to do similar projects.
So we mentioned the billy stick Ryan had to get earlier, and we mentioned my scapula earlier as well. We never rehearsed the scene before doing it when Ryan comes in as the guard and tries to beat the hand with a stick. I'm not sure if it was scripted or not, but Ryan hits my character on the back. And the first time we did this, of course, the first thing I yell is, my scapula!
You know, and sometimes it's hard to get a genuine reaction out of an action without actually doing that action.
Right.
And so we did have some points on set where you basically said, no, it's okay to hit me a little bit. I need to have the genuine reaction. But to your point, I think safety on set is a really important one, and trying to minimize the real things and keep everything as safe as possible, and safety being a number one priority.
Mm-hmm. I feel like when Ryan was writing this, he was just getting a lot of pent-up frustration, so he'd throw random scenes where I'm just getting attacked, beaten. Because there was another one, remember, with Peyton. I'm just walking in the hallways and we're filming, and that was easily 10 takes of me just getting smacked in the back.
Well, you know, when you were doing a really good job, I would write some things out. When you needed a little bit of motivation, I, would write in a new beating scene. We just had to keep things moving.
Just all motivation. I work for my art. I bleed for my art.
But ultimately, I think your point is actor safety is important.
Yes, absolutely.
We encourage you, if you are thinking about filming a scene with a complex action, to really think about how you're going to do that in a way that's going to be safe for everyone involved.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for me, the biggest takeaway from this, and this is a takeaway from the series as a whole, but I think this is a good episode to highlight it, is the importance of having a dedicated continuity staff member on board for the shoots. So we were understaffed for being able to shoot this production, and so a lot of times while I was operating the camera and also serving as director, I also served as continuity for the episode. This one is a really good example because even though this was shot over the course of 2 days back to back, between the 2 shooting days, we made a mistake with how the bucket was placed, with how the handle was positioned. So you can tell, cut between a few different shots, the bucket changes positions without being touched. And that obviously is a huge glaring continuity issue.
Right.
And so I think this episode is a really good reminder for me of how important continuity is. And while it's something that maybe you didn't even notice watching the episode for the first time, it is something that's there, it's something that's noticeable, and we like to limit that.
And I guess to that credit, because we are a smaller production, we don't have as big of a budget, we told ourselves all the little things we can do to make sure everything looks all right. If we can do that, that'll at least elevate our production to a higher level. And this is just one of those examples where some things slip through the cracks.
It's a really good point. And like that is something that, especially with this scene, it wasn't a complex arrangement of things. We really just had the security camera and the table with the bucket. And that was something that, honestly, I dropped the ball on, and it was something that I should have paid more attention to between the 2 shoot days. And so for me, that was a big lesson walking away from this one. And since we filmed this earlier on in production, it was a lesson that I learned early on. And I think some of the continuity from our later shoots that may have even been a little bit more complex, the continuity I think is a little bit stronger. And that doesn't mean there's not continuity issues later on, but we tried to limit them like Faaiz said. But I think that about does it for talking about episode 2, A Helping Hand. Thank you for everybody that is listening to this podcast and for everybody that has checked out SCP Declassified. We really encourage you, if you enjoy the podcast and if you enjoy the show, please be sure to share it with your friends. We would really appreciate some of that extra publicity and getting the word out there because, as podcasters say, podcasts live and die by word of mouth. So we appreciate your support and we appreciate you sharing the podcast, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Creator Consult. Whatever your creative passion, we hope you found some helpful tips and motivating words in this episode and enjoyed our conversation. Feel free to engage with us on social media. You can find the Creator Consult by Scruffy Chandelier Productions on X and Instagram at the Scruffy C. That's at THE_SCRUFFY_C at the Scruffy C. Join the Scruffy Chandelier Productions Discord server to join behind-the-scenes conversations for creators or regarding other Scruffy Chandelier Productions content. You can also join the conversation in the video comments on my YouTube channel. All the links can be found in the episode description below. Now get out there and learn, create, and enjoy your passions. And we'll see you in the next episode of the Creator Consult.